And we'll go out now with a very different July 4th elsewhere. The critical UK election challenging the warmongering status quo there and across Europe. Jack Clark at our UK desk in a conversation with George Galloway's Alternative Radical Workers' Party local candidate, Matthew Alford.
Good evening. And today we have a special edition of the UK Desk in conjunction with the upcoming July 4th UK elections. While the political spotlight often falls on the usual behemoths, Labour and the Conservatives, today we're turning our attention to an intriguing candidate from outside the mainstream. Joining us is Dr. Matthew Alford, a D-list anti-celebrity, academic and the Workers' Party candidate for Bath here in the UK. Dr. Alford's candidacy and his party's platform present a radical alternative focusing on the urgent issues of our time, from foreign policy to social justice, from affordable housing to environmental sustainability. Dr. Alford isn't just another face in the crowd. With a background in international relations and political communication, he brings a sharp, critical perspective on the reckless foreign policies that he believes have led us to the brink. Matthew Alford, welcome to the show. Now, firstly, what I'd like to ask you is, can you elaborate on the main reasons the Workers' Party is running in this election? And could you tell us a little bit about how the Workers' Party compares to other smaller or lesser-known parties in the UK, for example, the Green Party?
The Workers' Party is a socialist party that believes in renationalisation of some industries. It believes in infrastructure investment. And it believes in a sensible and sane foreign policy. George Galloway's first words after he won the Rochdale by-election a few months ago were, "Rishi Sunak, this is for Gaza." We share quite a lot, I think, in common with the Green Party, probably me as a candidate even more so than the party as a whole. I think that the Green Party is a bit flaky on these foreign policy issues. They put much more emphasis on climate change, which is an immediate problem, but one which will affect us incrementally over the coming generation or two or three. Whereas I think that the major risk that we face in our international system on our globe at the moment is the threat of a third world war. And that has been put out there by a range of mainstream politicians in a range of different countries, and of course a range of different specialists from military and security and academic backgrounds. It's an extremely alarming time, and the chances of a major great power conflict in the coming months, let alone the coming 5 years, I think is very high and is seen as very high.
Given the historical context of the Labour Party's formation in 1900 as a party for the working class, how do you view Keir Starmer's leadership? Has he diverged from Labour's original principles, and how does the Workers' Party aim to realign with those values?
The Workers' Party is a more traditional socialist party. I don't think we're an extreme party in any way. We call for a 5% wealth tax on the most expensive properties in the country, which I think is over £10 million. So we would raise some money, moving slightly to the left for domestic issues. This is akin to the kind of policy platform that was completely commonplace in the 1990s, the kind of platform that Jeremy Corbyn was advocated during his opposition, which was to raise about 50 billion for the Treasury each year from minor tax rises for the very, very wealthiest people in our society. So I think that's the shift that we're making. Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer is a continuation of the Tony Blair project, which abandoned nationalisation as the core tenet of the Labour Party. But of course, Keir Starmer is far worse than that. Keir Starmer is an heir to Blair, also on issues of war and peace. Keir Starmer has been very supportive of the genocide in Palestine since October of last year. And various other, and supportive generally of an aggressive foreign policy of the arms trade and so on. So Keir Starmer to me is very akin to Tony Blair, but as our leader George Galloway says, Tony Blair without the laughs.
What parallels do you see with the transformation of political parties in the US, and what lessons can be drawn?
Again, I think that we're talking about a shift to the right, generally speaking, over the course of my lifetime, where right-wing parties, right-wing ideologies have become very, very normalised. In fact, we see that all across Europe at the moment, in Italy and Hungary and France, the rise of the right, the normalisation of the right, and something similar has been happening in the United States, the rise of populism over the past 10 years. So, again, we're moving away from, we're moving towards further and further into the idea that society, that the rich should be increasingly rewarded, that there should be a gap between rich and poor, communities don't matter, infrastructure and investment isn't very important as long as the rich can make a quick buck. All those kind of things are happening across our world. And of course, there are foreign policy implications for that as well, because actually the further you shift off to the right, the less likely there is to be internationalization, internationalism, agreements that are made across countries. You could still have potentially a more right-wing government and still have international agreements, but it'd be much more difficult because they're going to be much more focused on nationalist issues. And so we need to have a sensible balance of those kind of things. The Workers' Party of Britain is a party which believes in reinvesting in Britain, in having a reindustrialization of our country as well. But we also believe in internationalism, in holding out our hands to the rest of the world.
In light of George Galloway's recent victory in Rochdale with a pro-Palestine campaign, what is the Workers' Party's stance on the Gaza conflict? What solutions do you propose, and how do those differ from the mainstream parties in the UK? How does your stance reflect or contrast with the positions of American worker movements and their foreign policy critiques?
George Galloway is a formidable foreign policy analyst, a formidable mind, a formidable orator, and a very, very experienced politician. He advocates, as does the party as a whole, an immediate ceasefire, but also a permanent ceasefire, which a lot of the other political parties have taken many, many months to come to even the idea of a temporary ceasefire. But what we advocate is a permanent ceasefire.
You emphasised the importance of foreign policy during this election. Could you discuss how the UK's current foreign policies are impacting domestic issues and why you believe a shift in these policies is crucial for the country?
There are many ways in which that is the case. Of course, the ultimate expression of that could be an escalation in Ukraine, probably as the most likely place, but also quite possibly in Taiwan, where Britain would no doubt be supportive of American forces as they are continuing to provoke things there. And in the South China Seas more generally, and also similarly in the Middle East, where there is the possibility of a war in Lebanon, between Lebanon and Israel, which could easily spread to Iran. There is, of course, one of the impacts of that would be our soldiers being involved, our soldiers being in harm's way, our soldiers quite possibly in great numbers being hurt or killed. And I certainly don't want that, and nor does the party as a whole. So that's one way. But of course, there are many facets to this. Just morally, as a country, actively supporting a genocide and actively supporting the dismantling of the international legal framework is in so many ways horrendous. We have colluded with the United States and Ukraine and other national governments to destroy the fuel pipelines between Russia and Western Europe. This is an absolutely insane thing to do. It was economically suicidal by Germany to engage and refuse to investigate what looks like a US bombing in 2022 of its own major supply line of oil and gas, the Nord Stream 2 pipelines. So this is just one rather dramatic illustration of how we are willing to deindustrialize and harm our own economies to crawl on the coattails of the United States. So there are enormous range of reasons and extreme depth of reasons why foreign policy is of vital importance to domestic policy. There are more than that as well, and it's hard to see it because, of course, oftentimes we are looking at our own societies. It's hard to see the wider world, but in this election, more so than in any time ever, we absolutely have to look at this wider world.
So, Matt, with the election on July 4th being a, monumental game changer, an explosion in UK politics, a snap election to potentially snap us back or forward, depends on who you ask. I want to know, like you've got the Democrats and the Republicans in America, for us in the UK, we've obviously got Conservative and Labour as the majority two parties, and it looks like it may be a Labour victory, given the sort of destruction, quote-unquote, of the Conservatives over the years. Now, I want to know from you the fundamental differences of both of these parties and your thoughts on the outcome and what needs to change in UK politics. That's the fundamental question, Matt. What needs to change in UK politics?
I think the Conservative Party have to go. They have to go because they are exhausted. But if it was possible to give less than half a cheer for what's to replace them, then I certainly would. I think in terms of foreign policy, Keir Starmer, his office, ruthlessly pursued Julian Assange. And this was well before he was holding high office. So I think that is an indication of this man's political leanings early on. He's also someone who's talked about how easy he finds it to be ruthless. He has also continued to advocate the sale of arms to Israel throughout its genocide in Gaza, and he will only backtrack on those sort of decisions when under considerable public pressure, so when they are convenient, which almost makes him weirder and worse than someone who actually believes wholeheartedly in that kind of imperialist project. So I think that the Labour Party under Starmer, but just generally under the direction that it has hewed since Tony Blair and since the major foreign policy issues have become so pressing since September 11th, 2001, I think there is no chance of them being reasonable or sane even on foreign policy issues that are going to affect us in the South China Seas, over China, over Ukraine and Russia, and in the Middle East, and of course possibly over North Korea, and who knows elsewhere as well. I think that they are going to be an absolute horror show, and I think because they're going to have a whopping majority in the House of Commons, I think it's going to be very difficult to challenge them. So I think actually what we might need to do is marshal support from outside of the left, and as easy as it is to mock Nigel Farage, Reform looks like it could well get something like 25% of the vote. So they're not just a marginal party. We do need to, I think, to work with them in some way to change fundamentally not just this country's electoral system, and hopefully to introduce PR, but also its entire outlook in terms of foreign policy, particularly at this most dangerous of times.
Thank you, Dr. Matthew Alford, for sharing your insights on the Workers' Party and the current red and blue circus that is UK politics. This has been Jack Clark for Arts Express with host Prairie Miller.